Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in his life. Um, one of the one of the things that's very obvious is the comparison you can make between Hoover and uh, Donald Trump, for example, because they're both businessmen and both of them did not have a lot of success, negotiating with Congress because they're used to a certain kind of way of life where it's my way or the highway, and that that's I think both to the detriment of both men and both presidents. The other part, when I was reading the book, I he reminded me of another president that because of his service to the country, and that's John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams, not again not as well known historically as his father, but served in the Senate and the House before his presidency, was an ambassador to three countries, then becomes president, serves his time as president, then goes back to the Senate and actually dies in his Senate seat, which is almost a romantic kind of American story. But Hoover reminded me of that kind of spirit of service to his country uh, and how much he cared about every single role he took on. And I think that stems from the beginning of your book, which is his Quaker upbringing. And he he really he grew up in a place where people didn't have much, but everything they had, they would, share, they would help out their fellow neighbor. And it was very, very kind of, Christian values were heavily instilled in him. And that took him throughout his whole life. Um, the Yes. So the interesting thing is he goes from Iowa, where he was born, and then he's orphaned at 9 years old, as you mentioned, and he moves to Oregon, correct, to live with his, I forget who it is, but it's a doctor,
Oh,
uncle. There you go. And there he falls in love with business, right, and tries to make the buck. How does that transition occur, and how does that influence the rest of his life?
yeah. Just on John Quincy Adams, I think you're right about that. And another area that they have similarities is they're probably the two most cosmopolitan presidents America has ever had. Quincy Adams spent a lot of his life outside of the United States. So did Hoover, from the age of about 21 or 22 until he was uh, about 40. He'd lived overseas, and so he had both of them learned a lot from politics overseas and were far more influenced by things going on in Europe in important ways than they were things going on in America. So yeah, I think that's a really appropriate comparison. As far as the business goes, that was, I think, sort of a refuge for Hoover as an adolescent. His uncle was a doctor, but his uncle was also one of a number of young professionals who were trying to put Salem, Oregon on the map and had real estate development interests and public transportation interests and different things. And Hoover started as their office boy. And I think having that personal responsibility and something that he could oversee and own himself and do to the best of his abilities and do it right and prove his worth, I think really meant a great deal to him. And people who remember him from that time say that he was the most efficient and most competent person they'd ever seen in any office anywhere. At the age of 14 or 15, he was pretty much running the day-to-day operations of this vast company for his uncle and his uncle's partners. So he took to business immediately, and he had that kind of very practical and retentive mind that served you well in business. And he knew his own interests really well. He knew what made money, what didn't make money, and that the whole point of the exercise was to make money. And he was, as far as anyone who ever employed him considered him to be an incredibly valued employee, and those skills that he developed served him when he went into business on his own. And again, if he had stuck to that route, we could very well know him today, not as a failed politician, but as a Vanderbilt or a Getty or one of these figures in American history, people who just made a ton of money and colonized the whole part of the economy. I think he certainly had that in him, but it wasn't really where his heart lay. He wanted to go out and as you say, make a difference in the world by serving people rather than by amassing wealth. And that was definitely something that comes from the Quaker background, from his parents. He came from a long line of Quaker ministers, and it was drilled into him at a fairly early age that public service was how you made a worthwhile contribution to humanity, and how you lived a good life. Getting rich was nice, but it was not an end in itself.